Get into the mood. We're all good to go? All right. Hello, everybody. Oh, I shouldn't yell that loud, I guess. It's great to see a bunch of very familiar faces as well as a bunch of new faces here this year. So that's great. So I'm Tim Mangan. My company, Team Immersion Technologies. Blah, blah, blah stuff, you know, where you can find me. We'll have another slide of that later on. So what I'm going to talk about today are a few things. So I'll talk about some trends that I've been seeing kind of across our industry space, which I define here as being application packaging and desktop management and delivery and all of that stuff. I'll talk some specifics about MSIX because I know that's why you want to hear from me. And then I'm going to try to pull some of that together with overall strategies that I think your company should be thinking about in this space. So let's go ahead and get started talking about some of the trends. And one of the first things I want to talk about is what we see customers out there using. And I found this website here that takes a look at what kinds of operating systems are being used on devices that they see over the years out in the space. And the top line there, if you can't read the text there, the top line there is actually the Android phone. But I can take that out of here on the site here by telling it I do not want mobile. Okay, we'll take that out and view the chart, and we'll see what it looks like without that. But what you'll see is Windows is somewhere between 71 and 72% usually. Yeah, 71.13%. And it holds pretty steady in terms of the overall. Right? And the next one down here would be iOS for the Apple's devices, so you see where they fit. And what's surprising to me the first time I looked at this is Linux is the orangish yellow line near the very bottom there. I thought that there was a lot more Linux out there. Of course, they're only looking at the desktop version of Linux, right? They're not looking at the server stuff in this thing. But that's really where the market is, right? So companies, particularly the enterprise space, which most of you represent, are really deploying Windows in their environments. And the reason they're doing that is because Microsoft over the years has made such a great ecosystem for the applications that are available to you to help build the entire workflow of what an end user does. So as they take a look at what that user or that group of users do, they figure out what types of applications they need for those users to get those jobs done. And typically, they kind of come into four chunks that we can look at that usually fall in the workflow for the user. So there's some apps that they can consume and find and retrieve data that they need to start the process. There are apps for them to be able to create brand new data when they need to. There are apps to be able to transform and maybe combine some data. And often there's some apps to kind of finish the publishing job to make that data available for other users, either within their organization or outside their organization, to use that data. But at the end, while I'm always busy dealing with the applications, that's not really what's important in the Windows environment. It's really all of that data. The applications are simply nothing more than a way to get that job done. But Windows does make a nice platform to make all of those things happen. I am seeing some transitions that are happening in the application space. And I'm going to break it up into two kinds. Now, when I talk about transitions, I'm not saying we're over here and everything's going to go over to here. This isn't one of those, we've been doing stuff this way, but everything's going to be Java. I remember hearing that 20 years ago. Everything's going to go to Java. Everything will be there. Or everything's going to be a web app, right? So we've heard those things. This is a partial transition, but we have these traditional applications. And the way I define that is these are applications that were designed with the idea that there is a human being with eyeballs on a screen and hands on a mouse and a keyboard, and anything that application does happens because there is somebody there saying, do it, right? And most of our applications traditionally have been in that form, but we've had this other form of applications that have been out there, and I'm going to give the term notification-based apps. So these may have started out like little tray icons that just sort of monitored for some activity. Maybe it's an update's available, maybe it's a message that's in, and it would then do something with that and maybe provide another notification base out. So typically it's a piece of software, something comes in, and then something comes out of it. And it happens whether or not there's a person right there. Right? I can be in bed sleeping, or doing something else, I suppose. But I don't have to be there. Now, Windows services are that way. We have background tasks under Windows, but we also have all of that stuff that's happening up in the cloud. So I want to ask a question. Actually, I've learned how to ask this question correctly now. I found that most people do not want to raise their hand when you ask a question in an audience like this. So I'm going to ask the question in this form. How many people here are not using Office 365? See, I knew it'd work. I knew it'd work. Okay, good. So most of the people here are. So when you're using Office 365, Microsoft has all sorts of notification-based software that is out there and is in use, and you are using and don't necessarily even know about it. Everything with notification-based software, the idea is that somebody at some point authorized that software to do something on your behalf. In the case of you getting an email, right? That email is going to come into the Microsoft Exchange server up in the cloud. Well, at the edge of that cloud, they've got some notification-based software that looks at that email address, the email information, and for a whole bunch of it, they just immediately throw it to the ground. They don't log it, they just destroy the thing because they're looking at the contents and they know that that's spam, really, really bad stuff that they should not allow in, and they don't even want it inside their data center. That got approved by the fact that your company signed up for Office 365. It's just part of the service, and you really don't have a choice. Either you get the service or you don't, and they're going to do that. They don't care who your customer is. They don't care who you are. That's going to happen. That's the first piece. Then there's this other piece that's going to know who your company is, and your Exchange Online admin set up some policies about how to filter mail and things to throw away. And so there's another piece there that, based on that authorization, is going to take a look at the emails and do some specific stuff for your company. And then there's other things that'll happen based on you. So like in my email, I've turned on that feature that says focused and unfocused email, right? So there's some stuff there that they call AI, right? That supposedly, the supposed part is supposed AI. I really just don't believe that's what it is. But it takes a look at your behavior of reading your email and decides what to put in that first bucket that you're probably going to want to look at right away, and what to put in that unfocused tab that you try to remember to every once in a while open up and take a look at because you're going to miss a bunch of stuff, right? But it's based on your behavior and how you treat it. So these are all examples, and we're seeing more and more of that type of stuff out as part of the application mix that we have in our companies. Another trend that I see is that all of these applications are built on a developer framework, and the lifespan of those frameworks is rapidly shrinking. Now, the Win32 framework has been around for I don't remember the number now, but it's over 30 years, I remember that. And most of that API is still part of the operating system and still supported by Microsoft today. There are bits and pieces along the way that they've deprecated and gotten rid of, but for the most part, all of that stuff still actually works, and Microsoft supports those APIs today. So if there's a security vulnerability in that, they're going to patch it and fix it. But you look at the .NET framework, .NET 3.5 is out of support. They're no longer patching those things. In the .NET 4 space, 4.0, 4.2, 4.5 are end of life now, and the other ones will be coming up in the next few years. The new stuff that they've done, .NET Core, which was originally the UWP stuff, but now they have what they now call just .NET, which is the newest stuff for the developers, .NET 5, 6, 7. Ignite is next week. We don't know this for sure, but I'm guessing that they're releasing that next week. It's going GA. Those are the newer ones, but Microsoft's life support on those are going to be very short. It's going to be 3 to 5 years, depending on what version. Like 6, they call it the long-term support version, so that'll have a 5-year window. Woohoo! All right? So when I go out to enterprises and I do any work with them, one of the things we always want to do is we want to inventory what they have. And when I look at that, typically at any large size enterprise, 10% of the applications they are currently running, the installer for that application is more than 10 years old. Okay? That used to be kind of okay. Now, I'm not a security person. I hate security, but we got to worry about these things these days. And these things do need to be patched and addressed, and you need to be able to take care of the problems. And I think that you're going to have to start paying more attention to those applications. You're going to have to start keeping them up to date more and more going forward. I think the frameworks are a great place for some of the bad guys that are out there to go ahead and start looking as a way to have some attack vectors. And it's not necessarily going to get them in the building, but this is part of what they might be using to go laterally once they're inside. So, let's talk about delivery and the packaging and all that. We have these different ways we can get these applications out onto the Windows boxes. We got the traditional installs that you can do, the MSIs, the EXEs, et cetera, maybe putting it into an image. We can do some things like my favorite there, Microsoft AppV. Do I have my pointer? I don't. Maybe it's that. No, it won't be that one either. That's the other clicker that has that feature. Okay. Microsoft AppV, which is my favorite, and still I consider to be the best way to put applications out today, if you're into AppV. We've got things like the app layering products out there. So this could be, if you're in a Citrix environment, they have their Citrix app layering stuff. VMware, they got VMware Volumes. I think Liquidware is here, right? Yeah, so they've got a layering product that works there as well. I'll talk a little bit more about that one. Of course, we also have the new kid on the block, the MSIX. App masking, so the stuff that FSLogix did that Microsoft now owns, they still support that. It's there. I don't expect them to expand on what they do anymore. They haven't said that, but I think it's pretty obvious that's pretty much, it is what it is. They want you to go to MSIX. And then we have other players that are out in the space as well. So these would be people like the Numescence, the Turbos. They have their own packaging methodology and way for you to get those applications out there. So you have a lot of different choices available to you, and you're probably going to have to use a mixture of them, right? There isn't any one of these that can deliver 100% of your applications. So you're going to be dealing with at least two, and depending on your size of your organization, maybe more. To get into some of the specifics on those, so app layering, right? We got actually a couple of forms of app layering. So we got one form, which is basically putting it on the box and in a way that it's really deeply integrated in. So this could be something like in the Citrix case, they will have you create these app layers, and you use it as a managed way to create your base image. So you take your Windows image, and then you just layer on, these are the apps I want to put in it, and by the time they're done, they squish it down, and the master image they push out through PVS or MCS is a Windows disk image that has everything integrated in exactly as if you had manually installed those applications into that image. But it's just layering it in. They just kind of push it all together and deploy that out. And that gets you a pretty high level of compatibility. There's some others that will wait till boot time, and so they'll bring it in and then they'll layer those pieces in. There are a few issues with some apps that'll show up in terms of that integration because of the way that works, but it still works pretty well. And then we have the ones that wait till after the user logs in. So that's more of that non-persistent, or what I sometimes call semi-persistent environment, maybe an RDS server. You want to wait till the user logs in and bring in just the applications they need. And that usually has a little more app compat issue to it, in fact, quite a bit. Because of the way the layering works after the user is logged in, they'll miss some of the integrations that they really need. So what I tend to find in the customers is when they're doing the user mode of the app layering, they'll use it sparingly. They'll use it for a few apps they know it really works well with, but they'll deal with the rest of the apps some other way. Microsoft AppV continues, in my mind at least, to be the best of the solutions that are out there in terms of application compatibility. We can do a pretty darn good job with that. In fact, I was just talking to a customer of ours that we trained a few years back today. And they have 1,000 applications, and they had, what did you say, 90% of the applications running under AppV today. And when did we do that class? That was 3 years ago, maybe? Yeah, something like that, right? So, you can really make a move like that pretty easily. The problem with it is it's an older technology. Microsoft isn't advancing it any further. And it is, pieces of it are end of life, like the server piece you don't really need is coming up soon. The rest of it has been sort of a moving window because it's built into the operating system. It gets a 5-year window every time Microsoft comes out with a new release because it's in there, so they're going to support that for the OS for 5 years. And as part of the OS, they therefore have to support it. So, a few years ago, people were saying, oh, AppV is going to be end of life in 2023. And then the following year, oh, it's 2024. And now it's 2026. I just got 22H2 on my machine now. So when Microsoft updates their end of life in January, I'm sort of expecting, I'll be now hearing it's 2027, oh my God. And we don't know how long it's going to continue, which is really the problem because we just don't know. Right? Microsoft has said they want to replace it with MSIX. They've also said they won't kill off AppV until MSIX can do all of the applications that you need to do. Ergo, she said it, I didn't, just for the record. Okay. MSIX, new kid on the block. We've had some experience with this for a number of years now. And the big issue with it is the fact that we don't have the level of application compatibility that we want. We can't do as many apps as we'd like with it. But it's really a combination of a bunch of things. They want to replace the MSI. They really took a big swath at a lot of different problems. They wanted to replace the MSI and get a more modern technology in there, get the safety effect that they had out of AppV of having the application containerized, and therefore you can put the application on, it's not going to break anything, you can take it off afterwards, it's not going to break anything. They wanted to get that in there. They also were looking at what other companies were doing in the app layering space, so they wanted to get some app layering-like features in there, which they now have with the MSIX app attach. And they also knew that enterprises wanted to repackage, so they put a pretty good effort initially in terms of getting a way to repackage existing applications to try to put them to run inside this container. So we can do that today. That's where a lot of the app compat comes from. But they also have a huge push as another part of it of getting developers to move to develop natively into MSIX. And that has been a very slow process. But I will say I am seeing on the developer forums, a lot of companies are now, rather than just a quick kick of the tires and deciding no, they're actually trying to go through that process and they're asking questions that show that they are actually trying to get their products working through MSIX to get that release out. We've seen a few that are out there. We actually have no idea how many are out there. Because those that decide to distribute, for example, through the Microsoft Store, you can't go to the Microsoft Store and figure out what's MSIX and what's not. There's nothing up there that'll tell you that. You would have to purchase the product, download it, break it open to figure out if it's MSIX, and no one's going to do that. There are a few that have said, hey, we got our MSIX, so they're out there. So Firefox Enterprise, it's up in the store. It works great. Works absolutely as good as their standard version. And that's because their product was really built multi-platform anyway. It runs under a lot of different platforms, so it was easy for them to do that. VLC Player has been up in there in a while. Blender is up there. The Blender version that's up there, quite frankly, isn't as functional. It's missing a whole bunch of stuff, but they have something, which is kind of nice. Yeah, lower levels, we can add the package support framework. So unlike AppV, which was really, really good at providing app compatibility, not just the app now running inside a container, but also apps that really don't work on the latest version of Windows terribly well, and just automatically recognizing what it needs and fixing it up. The MSIX, they didn't do that at all, right? The base MSIX just takes it, puts it in a container, and hope it works. They did develop something called the Package Support Framework, and they made that available as a way to fix those things up. And we've been doing a lot of work here in the last few years of trying to make the PSF do a much better job to increase the app compat, and I'll be talking about that a little bit later. So what have big companies have been doing in terms of the application packaging and delivery? They've been getting these software in from the vendor, and sometimes they could just go ahead and install it and create their own customization. So that could be just an install script that just runs the installer from the vendor and then does a few things afterwards. They might also take that and put it directly in the package and repackage the application. So they put the customization directly in the package, and now they just deliver this new thing out. And we've been doing that for about 20 years now, right? But with MSIX, one of the choices that we get is we have a choice. When we can do exactly what I showed on the last slide, we can put it in the package, do that customization, push it out. But we can also separate out the customization. And that's done through what originally we can do through a modification package. So we could create the application, create our customization, and push both of those out, and they just get tied together dynamically at the runtime. We can also do now shared package containers, SPC, yeah. Shared package containers is a new name, where we can package these things up separately and actually just deploy them out and then produce another job that pushes out a definition that says, I want these things to run together. So it's more than just the customization of one app. If I have two apps that need to work together, I can package them up separately and deliver them together. That, unfortunately, is only working on Windows 11. So you probably aren't going to use that feature for probably a couple of years to get through your hardware refreshes. You'll be on Windows 11. But for a large part of your organizations, I know right now, you're just not ready to do that. Now, I talked a little bit in terms of the software developers and what they're doing with .NET 6 and above. For them, what I really expect to see is not necessarily the apps you're running today get converted over and to run this way and they're delivering in that fashion. There will be some, but I think it's all of the new development. Anyone who's starting a new project today, they're going to be starting with the new frameworks. And they're going to develop native MSIX, and it's going to work really well. And you're not really going to have to touch the package except for the customization piece that you want to do. So you'll just take their package, create your customization layer, whichever way you do it, modification package or use the SPC. And then when the vendor releases the new version, the only thing you have to do is to deploy the new version of the package. Unless there is a change in their software that requires you to change that customization, that's all you have to do. Just push out the new version. The existing customization you have will just automatically work with it. You don't have to update it or redeploy that piece. Okay. So if we want to do MSIX repackaging, you have a number of choices. There are a number of vendors, many of whom are here. Okay, watch where I step. That are at the bottom side of that slide that will provide you the capability of producing MSIX packages. These are folks that, in fact, quite often what they do is they do a capture piece, and then you can put out to an MSI or to an AppV package or to an MSIX package or maybe other formats as well that are out there. And they're all supporting this stuff. If you want to stay with the free Microsoft tooling, you've got the Microsoft packaging tool, which is a free tool. Those of you who worked with AppV know the sequencer. It's a very similar process. It's a free tool. You get it from the Microsoft store. There's a free tool that I created called PSF tooling that you would use with that tool to bring in the package support framework. So that's sort of the free method that you could do that. I have a paid-for tool called TMEdX that it's actually more of a two-step process. You use the packaging tool to do the capture and not worry about the PSF. And then you run this thing, and it analyzes your package, tells you what you need, and fixes it up. Right? So that's another way to do that. The package support framework itself. So it's an open source project. If you want to dig out your Visual Studio and build your own fixes and that, you can go to town. How many people want to do that? Again, he asks the question where nobody has to raise their hand. And nobody does. Right. Of course you don't. You wanted to have tooling to do that. I don't know why Microsoft didn't understand that, because they only release it in source code form. So that's why I created PSF tooling to give you some binaries. And originally, I really was doing nothing more than I gave you the binaries, and you had to figure out what was wrong and say, yeah, I want this piece, yeah, I want this piece, and put it in. So over time, we've made that process a little easier for you to sort of figure out what you need and give you suggestions and make it easier to get that stuff in. But I've also spent a lot of time actually fixing the PSF. So because it is an open source project, I work with Microsoft and put some stuff in. Eventually, the people at Microsoft who were in charge of the PSF all got reassigned. So a little over a year ago, I just sort of took that effort over. And so I now have my own fork, and all of the new changes have been going in on that fork directly. And some of the other vendors that are bringing PSF into their products are actually pulling from me to put that in their product these days. It does borrow on detours, which was the technology behind Microsoft AppV as a way to make this happen. It's really kind of cool, because we can basically point at any Windows API and say, okay, we want to intercept the calls on this thing and have our software decide what to do and do the right thing. So as a framework, detours is just a fantastic thing to work with. So I've used it to expand the capabilities of the package support framework to fix problems with the Windows registry, to fix problems with DLL not found issues that show up when you repackage something in MSIX. Okay, so what needs the package support framework? Well, this is my latest numbers on that. If I take a look at just general enterprise applications, about 31% now don't need the PSF at all. You can package it up. They're good apps. They'll work. That was originally about 20% a few years ago. So Microsoft has made changes to the operating system and the MSIX runtime directly to get us a little better integration in. But there's a whole bunch that we can fix up with the PSF. And there's a whole bunch that I just don't know how to get to work yet. Okay, and that number is shrinking over time. In fact, it's not my next slide. In the MSIX report card, that's something that I push out every year, typically in January. I give kind of a snapshot of where we are in the MSIX industry, so that's a free report you can get off of my website at tmurgent.com. But I'll talk about some of the stuff that's in there, but you can always go and grab that. There'll be a new one coming out next year. But it'll talk about where we are in all of the spaces that Microsoft is doing things, but more importantly, I do a lot of compatibility testing, and I provide you numbers in that report each year. When I do that, I use a pretty strict criteria, and this is something that I could not get Microsoft at all to figure out when they talked about app compatibility. But I produced these different categories here. And my success category in the green at the bottom is pretty simple. It's like this. If you had that product installed as an MSI, would you replace that product with the MSIX package in the user notice? Right? If the answer is the user would not notice, that's success. If the answer isn't, it's going to be one of those other colors. So it's a very strict level. The next two levels, in the blue, the partial, and the failed feature, and the yellow, those are the levels that are really subjective, and it depends on who your company is and how you like to deploy software. So the blue level is basically, all the main features work. There are some little nits here and there, and my guess is that most enterprises would be willing to deploy that package, but I know that some would not. Right? I talked to some organizations, it's like, nope, if there's any change, we cannot retrain our users. We can't use it. Right? And others, yeah, IT is a little more in charge, so yeah, they have no problem with that. The yellow, it's really the flip. I think most companies would not deploy that package, but some would. Maybe they don't care about those features, they don't use them. It may be things like, let's see, Notepad++ is one Microsoft loves to demo. That's a great example for this. Microsoft, they do the demo, they go click, click, click here, they launch the application, hey, it's great, they think it's in the green category. It's definitely in the blue category. And that's because the shell extensions to Notepad++ don't work. And there are all sorts of people who really use Notepad++ a lot, and they're used to going to Windows Explorer and go right click, oh, the menu's not there. Right? So they're not going to deploy that. They'll continue with the existing version. Anything that's red or above, bad package, no one's ever going to use it. Okay, so that's the criteria. So, some testing results. So I took a whole bunch of these packages. Last year's testing set was 74 applications, and I'm actually embarrassed by the results that you see here. Okay, and the reason for these results, I should have 95% in the green here. But the previous year's test set had 65 apps. At the last minute, I added in the other applications, and I only gave one shot at AppV, and I didn't try to troubleshoot it. So these probably look a little more realistic numbers for what you might expect rather than what I would normally present. But that's what it is. AppV is very good at just taking the packages and our being able to get that level of app compat. Sure, you can't do 100% of your applications. There are a whole bunch of apps that aren't part of my test mix because I know they won't work for AppV. And I also know they won't work for MSIX because they don't work for AppV. So I don't even include those style of apps that are in here. So your numbers would be a little bit lower. Here are the results from last January on MSIX. So on the left is without the package support framework, and that's, you can see our 31.1% figure. But, your organization might be more in about the 50% range, quite frankly, on those set of applications. Depending on how strict you want to be. As we bring in the package support framework, so this was with TMEdX 2.0, we were at 62%, which I was very happy with. because that's much better numbers than we had the previous year. And in particular, the red number there really dropped down. This is sort of showing you what's happened over the last few years. So I've been doing this for a number of years now. So this is where we started out with that 20% in the bright green. So the bright green is without the PSF. And due to the things they've done in the operating system, we've kind of gotten that up to 31% now. And then the lighter green is when we bring in the package support framework. So the first year, we didn't really have it available. Then we got it available. Then I started fixing the PSF to get us more compatibility. And then last year, I actually expected that line to be flat at the end of last year. But right near the end of the year, I started going back and doing some stuff to the PSF. So we got a little bigger boost in there. All right. So a chart that looks scientific, but absolutely not. This is Tim just drawing on a piece of paper, okay, just to be very clear. But if we want to take a look at what does it take to get applications prepared, right? So some applications are very easy, some are more hard. If I were to take a look at the typical MSI packaging experience, I draw that graph like this, right? There's some apps that are really easy. A lot of apps takes some work. But in the end, you can do almost all of the apps. That's the typical thing. Now, to achieve this, our experience says the packager needs to have about 5 years experience. Because with MSI repackaging, it's all about how you do that package cleanup, because you are going to end up natively installing that on another different operating system, and you want to make sure that you don't have a lot of garbage that's in there. And you got to know how to do that cleanup properly and not break the package you have. And that takes about 5 years experience. Nobody can teach you how to do that. So what's that look like for Microsoft AppV? Well, I draw it like this. Microsoft AppV, it's a bunch of apps that Microsoft AppV can just automatically fix. And it's that automatic fix stuff that's so great. But the curve looks about like that. That curve is based on someone having about 2 years experience with AppV sequencing. Okay? So it takes less experience to get up to that level. And the new packager can do a pretty good job, effectively just a little bit of training. You know, they still will gain more over time. But even just out of the box, you take someone fresh off the help desk, get them a week of training, they can do a pretty good job with AppV just on that basis. MSIX. So this is the way I drew it initially. Okay. Yeah, there's some apps that are good apps. It's really easy. It's the Microsoft demo. Click, 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 boom. Off you go. But if it's not, you had to bring in the PSF. You know, it took a while to figure out what you needed and to put that in. So then I went to work and I started working on the package support framework. So 2020, I did some things that brought that bubble up. It still was a lot of work, though, to get there. So that's where the following year, based on the feedback, I said, all right, I'm not going to worry about the PSF. I'm going to worry about making this easier and really work on that tooling. And as I said, at the end of the year, I ended up working on the size of the bubble a little bit, but it was really about left shift here. What can we do to make this process easier, right? And so that's where the tooling started to do more automation and analysis, taking a look at what got put down there, making recommendations, giving you simpler pre-configured things about how to configure that config.json file and all of that, and just make it easier. So what I've been doing this following year, well, it's actually a bit of both. So I'm working on both increasing the capabilities of the PSF, as well as continuing that process of trying to make it easier and easier. And not only am I trying to make it easier and easier, as I talk to all of the different vendors out here that have their third-party packaging tools, they're also trying to do that as well, right? So these are some unpublished numbers. So I fixed up a bunch of stuff in the PSF. I also did a lot of work on TM-EditX. So this is in late August, I believe, I ran this test. So I've increased the number of apps. I now got 83 in that test database. But with all of that, I was able to get to 81% of those applications working. So we are starting to get a little bit further and further along. Now, it still took a bunch of work for me to get all the way to there. I had to figure out some weird things on some of those apps. But yeah, we can kind of start to get there. I'm starting to feel like this is a more realistic type of number. But, oh, big reveal, big reveal. Ooh. Okay, I think I put that in the description. There'd be a big reveal. This is it, this slide. Okay, so I started work this summer on the next step. So one of the problems we have, particularly the file redirection fix-up. is that Microsoft's approach when they created the PSF and the file redirections fix-up is they weren't really thinking about the way that you wanted to use the PSF. They were thinking about the developer and thinking that, well, the app's going to be pretty good, but there's going to be these apps and the developer is going to have to just make a fix for this one file. They've got a configuration file and you need to be able to write to it, and everything in the package can't get written to, so you need the file redirection fix-up to make a copy of that one file so that you can write to it and it'll go into your profile. And that's great, but what we've been doing is doing not just that one file, but we're trying to do 20 files and doing some other things to get the package to work. And we've been trying to make it so that you could just kind of point to it and say, put in the file redirection fix-up and make it work. And when you do that, the configuration file for that thing is about 40 to 50 lines long to describe how to do that. And it was also designed missing some things. And so I started a process and I've created a new fix-up called the MFR, the Managed File Redirection Fix-up, to be a replacement for the file redirection fix-up. Now it's not ready yet. I've finished the coding, I've been through the unit testing, I've been through the first set of tests. I still have some more work to do, but ideally by the end of this year, this will come out and become an option for to use instead of the file redirection fix-up. So we'll have both choices. But the concept is that hopefully the MFR will do everything the file redirection fix-up and more. And this is sort of the next step where we need to go. It also does some other things, though. So first of all, everything in the file redirection fix-up assumes you have stuff in the package, and if anything has to change, it's going to go into the user profile area. And most of the time, that's the right answer. But we've seen over and over a number of applications where that's not everything we need. So in addition to redirecting that direction, we also need to redirect the other direction. So I've got a document or a template file in my package, but when I'm done, this application doesn't want to have the output file isolated away from everything else. We want it to be able to go to the user's documents folder. Right? That is a folder that we need a redirection that goes the other direction. And so the MFR is going to have that natively built in and understand automatically that, oh, if it's the documents folder, we want to do that. If it's pictures, we want to do that. And then we'll have customizations that allow us to change the default rules. But out of the box, it's going to understand everything we've learned in the last 4 years with the file redirection fix-up and take care of that stuff for you. All you have to say is just do it, like that. The other thing is on the bottom there. In AppV, we had copy on write, right? So we had package files you couldn't touch, but when you tried to write to them, it would then make the copy over there. Well, with the file redirection fix-up, it does it even if you just glance at the file. If you just want to say, does this file exist? The file redirection fix-up makes a copy and says, yeah, it exists. It's right there, right? So we didn't want to do that. Thank you. So we wanted to have copy on write, so that's part of this as well. There are some new MSIX features. Microsoft is up in the next hour, so we'll leave it to them. But I'll just warn you, all the new features seem to be Windows 11 only. We'll see what they talk about today, but so far, that's what we got in the last year. All right, so to finish up, because I saw my 5-minute sign, what your company should be thinking about. And as I wrote that, I was very surprised. I've actually seen a number of different presentations today that actually touch on a lot of this same stuff. But this is really where I think your company needs to be thinking about a full application lifecycle about how you deal with applications. Some of the stuff that I talked about earlier about those shortened life cycles, it's no longer going to be, it's working, just ignore it. You're really going to have to start paying attention to these applications and try to stay more up to date. So, there's the ability to go out and discover the application you have. You also want to be able to discover information about the applications. So a long time ago, there's Bob Kelly. Bob Kelly created appdeploy.com, which is the greatest site in the world, right? Everybody who used AppDeploy. Hey! Okay? But then he went and sold it off and they killed it. They ruined it, I should say, right? And people for years have been asking me, what do I do? And the only thing I could really tell them is Google. And they say, well, why don't you build something? And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. But then last year, I noticed that Microsoft's documentation, all of the online documentation is actually up on GitHub. And you can go in and you can put in your own change requests when you see things are wrong and stuff, and they process that behind the scenes and figure out, and they'll do that. So I decided, all right, so maybe GitHub would be a great way, because that would be easier for me. So I created a GitHub site. I pre-populated it with something like 70 different applications. And the idea, this could be the new community site for people to exchange information about applications. So we take a look at where do you get the installer from the vendor? What are the typical command line for silent install stuff that you have? I'll also point to third-party sites like Silent Install HQ, which has a lot of that stuff. But we'll go beyond that. What are the typical things that an enterprise wants to customize in that installation? Because that's not covered by these other sites. And so how do you disable the auto updater, for example, right? That's good information to be able to have. And then to go beyond that, if there's any specific information about I packaged this up for AppV or for MSIX, what special did I do for that? And how did it work against that criteria I showed you on the colored slide, right? So you have that information up front. So we got a bunch of apps that are up there. And any of you that are doing packaging, I want to ask you, please, by December 31st, add an application up there, right? All you got to do is create, I've got templates of these files. They're called Markdown, MD. It's really simple syntax. You just take the template, change out the stuff with the information that's specific to your app, submit that back up, and we can get this community going. Right. Customization and the packaging stuff. Every packaging solution there can only do a subset of your apps. You are going to have multiples of them out there. I don't care what the salesman tells you, nobody can do them all, right? Training for that process does increase the amount of app compat that you can do. And finally, the automation, right? And it was great to see. I've seen some things today with automation that I didn't even know about before I showed up here today. I was glad to see that. But the one thing that I found in automation isn't the speed. It increases the package quality. Okay, number one, the automation becomes your documentation, so no one has to write a doc file, because all of the scripts and all of the stuff you put in there, that's your documentation on how you package that app up. But more likely is that you're going to package up, you're going to see some small things, and when we did it manually, sometimes we go back and redo that package, but a lot of times we wouldn't, or if we did, it wouldn't get into documentation, and we'd forget to do that, and we'd lose that. But it's so easy once you've automated that process, and I'm going to do everything through the script, I'm going to hit a button, and 5 to 10 minutes later, I'm going to have a package that I can test. I find every time, I just go, fix the script, hit the button, and get that better package. So it's a really question of increasing the quality. Yes, it does help for those apps that update with security updates all the time, and you can just sort of hit the button on that stuff. But you really want to start getting more into that automation. It isn't necessarily only about time. There are also some folks that are starting to get into more of the automatic testing. It may be something, it's sort of weird. I remember as a developer in the early 1980s, as a developer, we had nightly builds, and we had automated testing. Now, it was simpler testing because there were no graphics. Everything was just taking a bunch of text, and it would just, every day, it would automatically build, it would run some tests, and it would just do text matching, and it would flag the files that changed, and then someone would manually go in and just look at that and try to figure out, is that a bug, or did we fix or create a new feature, right? And then they'd update their tests. We're not really there today with this type of testing. But there are folks that are doing some things here. Remo3 is a company, they were here last year. They're doing some great stuff, but some of the other vendors are doing some of that stuff too. And I think that's really the next step that needs to be part of this entire process. In terms of updates, the security stuff, I think that's really important, especially even just taking a look at what you know about and things that are known that are out there. I know Flexera has, damn it. You need a little more. The thing that used to be Security, you gave me the 3 words yesterday. Thank you. Okay, so they've got some stuff that'll take a look, and it already knows. They got a cloud database, and it knows about the apps and what types of problems there and what version you should be on for those problems, and they can tell you about that. I think we need more of that going on so that we're a little more proactive. Separation of the application from the framework. So it used to be we kept, with MSI particularly, we kept those things separate. You deployed all of the frameworks, all the VC runtimes, and you kept that patched through one process, and you kept that stuff out of the apps. With AppV, we tended to blend them together because it stayed in the bubble. With MSIX, I think we kind of want to go back to that separation as much as we can, but sometimes there are reasons to keep it in the bubble, and that's another something you kind of have to figure out. There is no one answer for that. And then Project Evergreen, Aaron Parker from Melbourne, Australia these days, used to be up in the UK. He's got this thing, and it's a whole PowerShell thing, and he got a whole library of applications, and you could subscribe, and basically, for the apps you subscribe to, when it runs, you could run it once a month, once a week, every night, and you come in the morning, and it will have figured out which of those apps have changed. It'll download the new installer for you and have it ready, and if you're doing other automation, you can plug it into the framework of that and get the automated packaging and maybe the automated testing in the future, so you can just sleep in the morning, come in around 10 o'clock, and have all your work done for you. Yeah, right. Okay, so there's my stuff. I'm out of time. I am here, so please, please. I say this, and nobody ever does it. Come up, ask me questions afterwards. Thank you.